Tales of the Jedi is a series of animated shorts that are modeled after the storytelling and animation style of the amazing The Clone Wars show. And these particular shorts fill in some big gaps and provide some additional context for the prequel trilogy as well as the Clone Wars and Rebels shows. I have been highly anticipating this as the show is created by Dave Filoni, the king of all Star Wars and real-life apprentice of George Lucas. So I'm expecting a lot from this show and have very high expectations. So without any further ado, let's get this binge watch started. Episode 1 is a very simple tale of Ashoka being born, learning a rather dark lesson very early on from her mother about death, and then she gets kidnapped by an animal that looks like a saber-tooth. And right when it's about to eat her, she has an unspoken connection with it and it returns her to her village, and her people realize very shortly after that the reason this was possible is because she is showing signs that she is going to grow into a Jedi. And that's where this episode ends. True to the show's name, this did feel like a tale of a Jedi, and I liked how simple the episode was, and I especially liked the very nice and tranquil music that was in the background. It really was a very nice and subtle episode and a great way to start this new series. It wasn't anything mind-blowing like the other episode Dave Filoni had in mind for Ashoka, so I hope we get that episode, perhaps later this season or maybe in season 2, but this was a very nice and delicately told story that I really enjoyed. So this episode gets a very good 7 out of 10. This is an episode that I am not going to dare spoil. All I will say is that it follows a Jedi and his apprentice, that being Jedi Master Dooku and his apprentice Qui-Gon Jinn. This episode presented its politics in a way that only the Clone Wars TV show was so excellent at. This episode is only 16 minutes including credits, but it used its time very effectively. Again, it was presented as the title of the show suggests, it's another tale of a Jedi, albeit a darker one than the last episode. This was a beautifully somber and tragic episode. And if you want to know why the Clone Wars is such an intelligent and special show, then watch this episode and you will get a strong idea as to why. And for me, this was fantastic. So this episode gets a 10 out of 10. This episode gives us another tale of Jedi Master Dooku, which continues his arc from the previous episode, albeit this time he is with Master Windu. And this definitely feels like the first part of a two-parter, even though this still feels like it's a single tale. A Jedi was killed during her duties on a planet, and Windu and Dooku go down there to investigate what happened. As the episode goes, you find that Dooku is starting to question the tactics and methods of the Jedi, as well as their ideology. And this is wonderfully shown throughout the episode, especially during his final scene with Windu. You can really tell that he is starting to question and even get put off by the Jedi and their ludicrous and ineffective politics. And the show does a very good job at showing you how he is starting to fall as a Jedi and how Windu is ascending. We learn in this episode how Windu gets his seat on the Jedi Council, and Dooku feels undervalued and wrongfully dismissed by the Council. This was another great episode, and it's amazing how in such a short amount of time, this episode is able to show a lot of character. So yeah, this was a great episode, and I can't wait to see the next one. This gets a 9 out of 10. This episode completes Dooku's transition to the dark side, and it even fills in some blanks from the prequel movies, such as the file that was screwed with in episode 2 Attack of the Clones that Obi-Wan was trying to decipher and then asked Master Yoda for help. We are also introduced to another one of Yoda's race, who actually was in The Phantom Menace, but none of the sequels. And it's a shame that this episode didn't get the 4-part treatment that the Clone Wars got, because the Clone Wars would really develop characters so well to the point that you really liked them, and then out of nowhere something bad would happen to them and you would feel super bad for them. And it would just completely mess up your day. And although this was a really great episode, it's a shame that it didn't get more time. I feel like this episode would have benefited from being longer. That being said, I like how this episode takes place during episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and it shows how Dooku interacts with Qui-Gon and how he has heard lots of good things from him about Obi-Wan. And it also shows his reaction when Qui-Gon dies and how Dooku blames the Jedi for not listening to Qui-Gon and failing him. And this contributes to the faith that he is already losing in the Jedi, making this line that he says to Obi-Wan in episode 2,
"It's a great pity that our paths have never crossed before, Obi-Wan. Qui-Gon always spoke very highly of you. I wish you were still alive. I could use his help right now."
carry a lot more weight to it now. This episode again showcases the amazing character development and stories that we got in the Clone Wars, and how those stories really added to the overall Star Wars movies at large. The only difference is that these stories from Tales of the Jedi are just shorter, but they are still great Star Wars stories, and I loved watching these episodes about Dooku. Although it could have been longer, this again was a great episode, and the music for all of these episodes has been fantastic and epic and dark, and this episode, it really is no different, and it really adds to the overall feeling of dread in these darker stories. And this episode gets another 9 out of 10. This episode is called Practice Makes Perfect. You hear that, Rey? And this episode reunites us with Anakin and Ahsoka again, including young Kanan, which was such a great bonus. It was so amazing to see these two together again, and to even see her with Rex and the clones again, man. And a lot of people will think this is just some random clone, not knowing that it's not just some clone, it's Jessie. And if you saw those final 4 episodes of the Clone Wars, man, this whole episode hits in a different way. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So in this episode, Anakin attends Ahsoka's training lesson, and although Obi-Wan and the Jedi are impressed, Anakin is unimpressed and thinks this is a lackluster trial that isn't really teaching her what she needs to learn to survive. So he takes her to his own training ground where the troopers shoot her with their weapons on stun rather than having droids. And this resulted in her losing and getting stunned and knocked out for an hour, and then Anakin telling her to try again and again and again and again. This led to some really funny comedy as well.
How long was I out?
An hour.
An hour?
Yeah, Jessie really tagged you.
Sorry, Commander.
And it even led to Ahsoka getting better. She actually managed to stick it out for longer, and even when she gets better, she still loses as well. That was great, and really does deliver the lesson, practice makes perfect. And if that wasn't good enough, it took a while for me to realize this, but this training session is exactly what happens to Ahsoka for real in the final episodes of the Clone Wars when Order 66 happens and all the clone troopers turn on her. This training scene just made this all the more sad, that they are all training her here so she can protect herself, and are unaware that the person she has to protect herself from is them, her friends and family. We even get the music from the final episode of the Clone Wars here too, as well as some other iconic music from the series. And if you've watched the Clone Wars, it is just so sad to see this because you know where it all goes later. And the episode ends with a scene that happens in the final episode of the Clone Wars. This was a phenomenal episode and my favorite of this series so far, and it gets an amazing 10 out of 10. What a brilliant episode, and it was the shortest at 13 minutes, including credits. Talk about making the most of your time. I honestly don't know how it can get better than this. I was shocked to find out that this episode took place right after the final episode of Clone Wars. We see that Ahsoka came to Padme's funeral in episode 3 as the two were very good friends in the Clone Wars, and Senator Organa spots her and he offers her a device to contact him. We also see her here with Rex, who was great to see again, but it was sad that we didn't get to see what happened to him after. We then see Ahsoka just living amongst the locals. However, one citizen who almost died sees Ahsoka using the Force to save her. The brother, on the other hand, who thinks the Empire are the good guys, reports Ahsoka while she's gone with his sister. Both her and Ahsoka arrive home and they see the village is completely destroyed. He sure as heck knows that the Empire is not here to help now. The Inquisitor thinks he was lying, and then Ahsoka shows up in one of the most epic, badass reveals. And the music becomes really epic here. It is by far the best music of the season, and this really was so freaking epic. This was a new theme for Ahsoka, and it's one that really drove home the awesomeness of this scene. And well, I'm not gonna spoil what happens in it, but it was great. Just make sure you crank up your speakers as loud as you can, just as I did with my 4K projector and Dolby Atmos surround system. And then be ready to watch one of the most epic moments in all of Star Wars. And the episode ends with Ahsoka joining the Rebellion, which is where we find her years later in Star Wars Rebels. The end. This was short, and I would have liked it to be longer, but man, what a tale to end on. This episode left me with a super epic impression, and I didn't want it to end. And you know what? I can't give it any less than a 10 out of 10. Dave Filoni really is the king when it comes to Star Wars. I knew that I would like this show, but I didn't know I would love it this much. I feel really happy. Usually when we watch Star Wars stuff lately, you feel let down. But watching this has made me feel so incredibly happy, and it just shows how fantastic Dave Filoni is at making Star Wars. I really hope we get another season of this. I really do. This season as a whole did not have a single bad episode to me, and I was going to give this show overall a 9, but you know what? I don't think that's enough. The whole series is so easy to sit through, and I can't remember the last time I felt this happy and satisfied watching a show. And this show as a whole gets a well-deserved 10 out of 10. I really hope the show gets a second season. I am so happy that the Clone Wars is continuing in its own way, as it was, and still is, one of my all-time favourite shows, and is definitely my favourite thing with regards to Star Wars. I am very eagerly anticipating a season 2, and it can't happen fast enough. It's sad that there are only 6 episodes. I was able to binge watch them in one sitting, and I would happily have binge watched 6 more. On the plus side, all of the episodes were released in one day, and they were so much more fun as a result, so that was good. Also, after the Batman, this is some of the most epic music I've heard all year. Unlike the other Star Wars shows, and especially the Obi-Wan show, this is top tier Star Wars. This really was terrific television, and I cannot wait to see more of these Star Wars The Clone Wars types of stories continue. Well done, Dave Filoni. Well done. Hi everyone, the next trailer for Avatar: The Way of Water has been released, so let's take a look.